Emily's day started like any other. She woke up before the sun had risen, the sky still dark outside her small apartment window. The sound of buses and early traffic drifted in as she quietly got dressed for work. She tied her hair into a loose bun, put on her worn black shoes, and slipped into her uniform, a plain black shirt and matching pants. There wasn't much time for breakfast, so she grabbed a banana and rushed out the door. She walked quickly through the chilly morning streets of Chicago. The city was always busy, but at this hour it was peaceful. Emily liked that. It gave her a few moments to think, to breathe, to prepare herself for the long shift ahead at the restaurant where she worked as a waitress. The restaurant wasn't fancy. It was a cozy place with dark wood tables, warm lighting, and a bar in one corner. The kind of place that regular customers liked because it felt familiar. Emily had been working there for nearly 2 years. She didn't talk much. Most people thought she was just quiet, maybe even a little shy. But it wasn't that. She simply preferred to stay in the background, do her job, and go home. She had learned to keep her head down and work hard. Life hadn't been easy, and she had learned not to expect much from it. As she entered through the staff door at the back, she greeted the cook, Miguel, with a small wave. Miguel smiled. He was one of the few people who talked to her every day. He liked her because she was always polite and never complained, even when the work was hard. Emily put her bag in her locker, tied her apron around her waist, and started preparing the tables for the day. At the far corner of the restaurant stood an old upright piano. It was a beautiful piece once. Now it looked forgotten. Dust collected on the keys, and the wooden frame had scratches and stains from years of neglect. Most of the customers didn't even notice it was there. The restaurant had bought it secondhand years ago, hoping to hire live musicians, but that idea never lasted. Over time, the piano just became part of the furniture. But Emily noticed it every day. She passed by it on her way to the front tables, and often stopped to run her fingers across the top, wiping away dust. She never played it. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't think anyone would care. The last time she played a piano was over 3 years ago, in her grandmother's house. Her grandmother had passed away and the piano had been sold. Since then, music had become something from her past, like an old book you once loved but had to give away. Emily had grown up in a small town outside Chicago. Her parents struggled to make ends meet, and her grandmother had been the one constant in her life. Her grandmother had been a piano teacher and once played in smoky jazz clubs in the 1960s. She taught Emily everything: how to read music, how to feel it, how to let her fingers speak emotions. Emily had shown great promise. By the time she was 16, she could play difficult classical pieces and improvise jazz riffs with ease. But dreams don't always survive in the real world. Her grandmother got sick, and her family needed help. College had to wait. Music had to wait. Emily took jobs, waitressing, cleaning, anything she could find. She moved to the city, hoping things would get better. They didn't, but she kept going. Music slowly faded into the background of her life, replaced by bills, tired feet, and long shifts. Still, every time she looked at the restaurant's piano, something stirred inside her. She never said it out loud, but she missed it. She missed the feeling of pressing the keys and letting her heart speak through sound. She missed the way her grandmother would nod with approval when she played something well. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a part of her she had to leave behind. Most of the customers at the restaurant didn't see Emily. They saw a server who brought their food, refilled their drinks, and cleared their tables. Some were kind, some were not. Some didn't even look her in the eye. She didn't mind. She knew her job, and she did it well. Her manager, a strict but fair woman named Donna, appreciated her reliability. Emily rarely took time off and never made a fuss. One regular customer, an older man named Mr. Taylor, once noticed her stopping by the piano and asked if she played. She smiled and said, I used to. He nodded and didn't press further. That was the most anyone had ever asked her about music since she started working there. The restaurant had its usual rhythm. Busy during lunch, quiet in the afternoons, then busy again in the evening. Emily worked mostly evening shifts. She didn't mind. It meant better tips and fewer people during cleanup. Some nights, when the place was nearly empty and the lights were dim, she would sit at the piano after her shift. Not to play, just to sit. Her fingers would hover over the keys, and she would remember. Her hands still remembered the positions. Her mind still heard the music. She never told anyone about her past with music. She wasn't ashamed, but it felt like a distant memory now. She had chosen a different path, not because she wanted to, but because life demanded it. People often said, "Follow your dreams." Emily knew that wasn't always possible. Sometimes surviving was more important than dreaming. But deep inside her, the music never died. It lived quietly, waiting, like a candle flickering in the dark, small but unextinguished. And though no one around her knew it, Emily was someone with a gift hidden beneath long hours, tired eyes, and quiet smiles. She didn't seek attention. She didn't believe she was special. She just worked day by day, doing what she had to do. But fate has a strange way of finding those who hide their light. And the piano that no one played, that sat in the corner collecting dust, would soon become the center of something no one expected. Not even Emily. What began as an ordinary day in her routine life was quietly building towards something extraordinary. Her past, her talent, and a chance encounter would soon collide in a way that would not only change how others saw her, but how she saw herself. But for now, Emily just wiped down the tables, filled the salt shakers, and polished the menus. And, as she walked past the piano one more time, she gently touched one of the keys, letting it press down with a soft click. No sound came out. It was too quiet to hear. But in her heart, the note rang loud and clear. The evening had just begun, and the restaurant was already starting to fill up. Emily moved quietly between the tables, carrying trays, refilling glasses, and taking orders. She had done this so many times that her body worked on its own, like a well-practiced dance. Her mind often wandered during these hours, but her hands never made mistakes. The regular customers were already seated at their usual spots, Mr. Taylor at the back with his newspaper, the young couple near the window, sharing a pasta plate, and the group of office workers laughing a little too loudly at the bar. Everything felt normal. The hum of conversations, the clink of forks against plates, and the soft music playing from the speakers filled the air. Emily worked calmly, as always. Nothing unusual ever happened here. Or at least, it hadn't. Until that night. Around 7:30 p.m., the front door swung open with a loud creak. A group of people entered, talking and laughing as if they had just left a party. They were dressed in expensive clothes, shiny shoes, designer coats, silk scarves. Leading the group was a man in his late 40s with slicked-back hair and a gold watch that sparkled under the restaurant lights. His voice was loud, his laugh louder. Even before he sat down, people in the restaurant had already noticed him. Emily looked up from her notepad as they approached the biggest table near the center. She had seen rich customers before, but something about this man made her uneasy. He had a certain energy, like he wanted all eyes on him. And he got what he wanted. The other customers glanced over curiously, and the waitstaff straightened up a little more than usual. The man's name was Victor. He didn't introduce himself right away, but that name would stick with everyone who was there that night. He chose the best seat at the table, leaning back as if he owned the place. His friends, 4 men and 1 woman, all followed his lead, laughing too hard at his jokes and nodding at everything he said. Emily was the one assigned to their table. She approached them with her usual polite smile and asked if they were ready to order drinks. Victor didn't look at her. He waved his hand in the air and said, "Bring us your best bottle of wine." "No, Bring two. Actually, bring three. We're celebrating. She nodded and left quietly, heading to the bar. Behind her, she could still hear his loud voice echoing through the restaurant. He talked about business deals, expensive vacations, and people he thought were beneath him. Every sentence seemed to start with, "I once," or "I always," or "they begged me to." It wasn't hard to see that Victor enjoyed being the center of attention. As the night went on, his voice grew louder, and so did the laughter. From his table, they ordered the most expensive dishes on the menu and changed their minds several times. Emily stayed calm, as she always did. She had dealt with all kinds of people. But Victor was different. Not because of his money, but because of the way he spoke to others. Like they didn't matter. After their food arrived and they were halfway through the meal, Victor looked around the restaurant and made a comment that caught everyone's attention. "This place is nice," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "But it's missing something." His friends looked at him curiously. One of them asked, "What's it missing?" Victor gestured toward the old piano in the corner. "That thing. It's just sitting there, collecting dust. If you have a piano, someone should be playing it, right?" Emily was walking by just then, clearing a nearby table. She heard his words and paused. Her eyes shifted toward the piano, her quiet companion for so many evenings. Victor noticed her pause. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they're about to play a game with you. "What do you think?" he asked her. "Does anyone even know how to use that thing?" Emily looked at him politely and said, "It hasn't been played in a long time." Victor raised his eyebrows. "And you? Do you play?" She hesitated, not expecting the question. The room felt quieter suddenly, like people were starting to listen. "I used to," she said softly. Victor laughed. "Used to, huh? That's what everyone says. I used to. That's like saying, I used to fly airplanes, or I used to be famous. You either can or you can't." Emily didn't respond. She looked down, then turned to walk away, but Victor wasn't done. "Wait, wait," he said, his voice louder now. "Tell you what. If you can sit down at that piano and play something good, really good, I'll give you $1,000. Right here, right now." The entire restaurant froze. People stopped eating. Forks hovered in the air. Heads turned toward Victor's table, then toward Emily. She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. $1,000, Victor repeated, pulling out his wallet and waving a thick roll of cash. "If you can play something that makes me say, wow, it's yours." His friends laughed. One of them said, "This should be interesting." The woman at the table pulled out her phone, ready to record. Emily's heart pounded. Not because of the money, but because of what he had just done, put her in the spotlight, challenged her in front of everyone, turned her into the evening's entertainment. She looked at her manager, Donna, who was standing by the bar with wide eyes. Donna gave a tiny nod, unsure of what else to do. Emily walked slowly toward the piano. Her feet felt heavy, her fingers tingled, her chest felt tight. She could hear whispers around the room, some curious, some doubtful. "She's just a waitress. Do you think she can actually play? Maybe she'll surprise us." She sat down on the wooden bench. The piano looked older up close than she remembered. Some of the keys were yellowed, and one was chipped. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. They felt familiar and foreign at the same time. She took a deep breath. Her mind went back to her grandmother's living room, to the smell of old books and sheet music, to the warmth of sunlight through the curtains. She remembered the first song she ever played. Then she remembered the last. She closed her eyes and pressed the first key. There was a moment of silence. Then the music began. It was soft at first, like a whisper, but slowly it grew. Her fingers moved with grace and memory, dancing across the keys. The melody was rich, full of emotion, joy, sorrow, hope, and everything in between. She didn't just play the notes, she told a story. People listened. Really listened. The noisy restaurant turned into a quiet concert hall. Phones were lowered. Forks were set down. Even Victor, who had been grinning a minute ago, now sat still, watching, his expression unreadable. The music poured out of her, raw and real. She didn't think about the money. She didn't think about Victor. She thought about her grandmother, about the little girl she used to be, about the dream she had almost forgotten. When the last note faded into silence, the room was still for a second. Then came the sound of clapping, soft at first, then louder. A few people stood up. The applause spread through the restaurant like fire. Victor didn't say anything. He reached into his wallet, pulled out the promised money, and placed it on the piano. His smile was gone. Emily looked at the money, then at the people clapping. She smiled, not because of the cash, but because something inside her had come back to life. She stood up and walked back to her station. People patted her on the shoulder. A customer near the door said, "That was beautiful." Even Donna looked, teary-eyed. But Emily just nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, and returned to her work, quietly, just like always. Yet nothing would ever be the same again. Emily sat in front of the old piano with her hands resting gently on the keys. The soft light above her head created a quiet glow on the wooden surface, and the room, once full of laughter and noise, had fallen into a hush. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. Just a few minutes ago, she had been walking from table to table, pouring water, delivering food, clearing plates. She was just a waitress in most people's eyes. Someone meant to serve, not someone to perform. But then everything changed because of a single comment and a careless bet. Victor, the wealthy businessman who sat laughing at the biggest table, had challenged her to play the piano in front of the entire restaurant. He had offered her $1,000 if she could impress him. At first, it felt like a joke. It felt like he was making fun of her. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see humor. She saw pride, the kind of pride that believes money can buy anything, even a person's confidence. Emily didn't want to play just to prove something to him. She wasn't interested in winning a bet. But deep inside her heart, something had awakened. A spark that had been sleeping for a long time was now burning quietly. And as she touched the first key, that flame began to rise. Her fingers moved slowly at first. She wasn't nervous about playing the wrong note. She was nervous about feeling everything that the music would bring back. Her hands had memories. Her heart had memories. The moment she began to play, it was like opening a door that had been locked for years. The melody floated into the room, soft and rich, like the sound of a memory coming alive. It wasn't a well-known song from a famous composer. It wasn't a flashy or fast piece. It was something she had created a long time ago, a tune she used to play for her grandmother on quiet afternoons. The music had a kind of honesty to it. It spoke without words. It carried sadness and beauty together, like tears falling during a smile. People who didn't know a thing about music still felt something. The sound touched their hearts in places they didn't expect. Her left hand kept a slow, steady rhythm, while her right hand danced lightly across the higher keys. She played with grace, with control, with emotion. She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling a story about dreams that had been forgotten, about love that had been lost, and about hope that refused to die. People in the restaurant stared, some with mouths slightly open. The young couple who had been chatting earlier now held hands in silence. Mr. Taylor, the regular who always read his newspaper, lowered it to his lap and wiped his eyes. Even the cook, Miguel, stepped out from the kitchen, holding a plate in one hand and leaning against the door frame, frozen. Victor sat with his fingers laced under his chin, no longer laughing. His friends didn't look at their phones anymore. Even they were caught in the spell Emily had cast with her music. Emily didn't notice any of this. She was lost in the song. She remembered her grandmother's voice humming softly beside her, the scent of lavender from her sweater, the way she used to say, "Let your hands speak what your heart feels." That's what Emily was doing now, letting her hands speak for her. Her eyes stayed closed for most of the performance, but when she opened them briefly, she saw her reflection in the piano's polished surface. She didn't see the tired waitress anymore. She saw the musician she used to be, the girl who once believed in her dreams. As the music reached its highest point, her fingers pressed harder, stronger. The sound filled the room like a wave. Then, just as gently as it had begun, the melody softened. Her hands slowed. The notes faded, like the end of a deep breath. And finally, she played the last note. A single, clear sound that lingered in the air. Silence followed. A silence so deep it felt like time had stopped. Then came the applause. It began with one person clapping, then two, then the entire restaurant stood up in a loud, thunderous round of claps and cheers. People whistled. Some shouted, "Bravo!" A few even had tears running down their cheeks. Emily stood up slowly, feeling slightly dizzy. She had given a piece of her soul to the music, and now she was back in the real world, standing among people who looked at her differently than they had before. She wasn't invisible anymore. Victor rose from his seat, still holding the roll of cash. His face had changed. The smug smile was gone. He walked toward her and placed the money on the top of the piano without a word. He looked at her for a moment, just a moment, then returned to his seat. His friends remained quiet. None of them laughed anymore. It was as if they had been reminded that money and charm could not create real talent. Emily looked at the money, but didn't reach for it. She wasn't playing for the reward. She had done it for herself, for the little girl who had once believed in magic, for the young woman who had worked in silence for too long, for the memory of her grandmother who had given her the gift of music. Customers came up to her, thanking her, praising her, asking if she had ever played professionally. Some said she should be on a stage. Others said they hadn't heard something so moving in years. She simply smiled and nodded, overwhelmed by all the attention. Her manager Donna walked up and hugged her without saying a word. Donna wasn't the hugging type, but that night was different. Even she had tears in her eyes. That was something else," she whispered. "You've got something special, Emily. Something really special." Emily nodded but didn't speak. She was still holding everything inside, afraid that if she spoke too soon, she would cry. Miguel from the kitchen stepped forward and handed her a small towel. "Wipe your hands," he said with a grin. "You just burned the place down." Everyone laughed, and Emily finally relaxed. A woman who had been recording the performance on her phone asked if she could post the video online. Emily hesitated but then agreed. "Sure," she said quietly. "If you think people would like it." "Oh, trust me," the woman said, smiling. "People are going to love it." Emily returned to work that night, helping clean up tables and refill drinks. But something had changed. People treated her differently now. They looked at her with respect, with curiosity. Some asked her name. Others simply smiled and nodded when she passed. She didn't play again that night. One performance was enough. But the feeling inside her remained. The warmth, the pride, the joy. She had forgotten how much she loved music, how much it healed her, how much it made her feel alive. Later, when the restaurant had closed and the staff was cleaning up, she sat back down at the piano just for a moment. Donna came over and said, "You know, if you ever want to play during dinner hours, I think people would really enjoy it." Emily looked up, surprised. "You mean like regularly?" Donna nodded. "Why not? You're clearly more than a waitress. You've got a gift. Let it out." Emily didn't know what to say. For so long she had hidden her talent, believing there was no space for it in the life she lived. But now, the world had seen it, and the world had loved it. She walked home that night with the cold wind brushing against her cheeks and a small smile on her face. The city lights flickered, and the streets were quiet. Her steps were slower, more thoughtful. She didn't feel like just a waitress anymore. She felt like someone who had rediscovered a part of herself that she thought was gone forever. At home, she placed the envelope of money on her table. She didn't count it. The value wasn't in the cash, it was in the moment. That moment when she remembered who she was and what she could do. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her heart still full of music. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if people would still talk about her performance, or if the video would even matter. But she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer afraid to be seen. She was no longer afraid to play. The bet that was meant to embarrass her had become the spark that reignited her soul. Victor had tried to mock her, but he had given her something unexpected, the chance to remember who she really was. And Emily, the quiet waitress who dusted the piano every evening, had finally let the world hear her voice. Not with words, but with music that would echo far beyond that restaurant on one unforgettable night. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of Emily's small apartment. The warmth of the early light touched her face, and for the first time in months, she didn't wake up feeling tired or anxious. Her eyes opened slowly, and a peaceful smile crept onto her face as the memory of the previous night returned. For a moment she lay there still, trying to hold on to the feeling of playing the piano, of the applause, of being seen. It felt almost like a dream, but it wasn't. It had really happened. She had sat in front of the restaurant's dusty old piano and poured her heart out in music, and the world had listened. She got out of bed and made herself a simple breakfast, toast and tea. Everything around her looked the same as always. The small table near the window, the worn-out sofa, the little stack of unpaid bills on the counter. But something inside her was different now. It was hard to explain, even to herself. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. For years she had hidden her gift, pushed it down, convinced herself that her dreams didn't matter anymore. But last night had reminded her that her dreams were still alive, waiting patiently for her to believe in them again. After breakfast, Emily picked up her phone to check her messages. Normally, it was quiet. Maybe a message from her manager Donna, or a reminder from the bank. But today, her phone was buzzing non-stop. Dozens of notifications flashed on her screen. At first, she didn't understand. Then she saw the message from one of the customers who had been at the restaurant last night. "You're going viral. The video's all over social media. You're amazing." Emily blinked in surprise. She opened her social media apps and gasped. There it was. A video of her playing the piano, taken by the woman who had asked her for permission. It had already been shared thousands of times. Comments were pouring in from strangers all over the world. "Who is she? This is the most beautiful thing I've heard all week," I cried listening to this. So much emotion. This waitress has more talent than half the music industry. People were tagging their friends, writing messages like, "Listen to this," and "Watch till the end." Some were asking for her name, others were trying to find out which restaurant she worked at. Emily sat on her couch in shock, staring at the screen as new likes and comments popped up every second. Her heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with disbelief and excitement. She wasn't used to attention. She had lived most of her life quietly, staying in the background. But now, suddenly, people all over the world were talking about her. They weren't laughing or mocking her. They were cheering for her, they saw her. Just then her phone rang. It was Donna. "Emily, are you seeing what's happening? You're famous." Emily laughed nervously. "I guess so. I don't know what to say." "Well, you better get ready. The phone at the restaurant hasn't stopped ringing. Reporters are calling. News channels want to talk to you. I even got a message from a radio station asking if you'll come and play live." Emily couldn't believe it. Just 24 hours ago, she had been wiping tables and stacking napkins. Now people were inviting her to perform on the radio? "I don't know, Donna. It's all happening so fast." "I get it," Donna said gently. "But you deserve this. Don't be afraid of it." Emily thanked her and promised to stop by the restaurant later. After the call ended, she sat there for a while, thinking. Her whole life, she had been playing it safe. When her grandmother passed away and her family's financial troubles grew worse, she had given up on music to work full-time. One small decision at a time, she had pushed her passion aside until it became a secret she kept even from herself. But now, that secret was out. Later that day, she put on her uniform and walked to the restaurant. As soon as she stepped inside, everyone clapped. The staff, the customers, even the chef came out to cheer for her. Emily blushed and smiled, feeling a little overwhelmed. Donna walked over and handed her a newspaper. "You made the front page," she said with a grin. Emily looked at the paper. There she was, seated at the piano, eyes closed, fingers dancing across the keys. The headline read, "Waitress wows the world with stunning piano performance." Beneath the photo was a short article about her unexpected performance and the viral video. It mentioned how Victor had made the bet and how Emily had silenced the room with her music. The article ended with a quote from one of the customers. "She didn't just play a song, she made us feel something." Emily felt tears in her eyes. She had always believed she wasn't special, that there were millions of people out there more talented, more connected, more deserving. But maybe she had been wrong. As the day went on, more and more people came to the restaurant. Some came to eat, some came just to see her. A few asked for photos, and one even brought flowers. A little girl with wide eyes walked up and said, "I want to play piano like you someday." Emily bent down and smiled. "You can. Just never stop playing." Later that week, things became even crazier. She received messages from music teachers offering her lessons, from event organizers asking her to perform at local festivals, and even from a talent agent who wanted to set up a meeting. Emily felt dizzy. Was this really happening to her? One day she sat with Donna after closing and talked about everything. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I fail? What if this is just a moment and it disappears?" Donna looked at her, kindly. "Maybe it's just a moment. Or maybe it's the beginning of something bigger. Either way, you don't have to go back to hiding." Emily nodded. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back to living like she didn't matter. She had found something inside herself that needed to be shared. A few days later, she received a message that left her speechless. It was from a famous pianist named Daniel Grant. He had seen the video and wanted to meet her. Emily stared at the message in shock. Daniel Grant was someone she had admired for years, a legend in the world of music. When they met at a quiet cafe in the city, Daniel smiled warmly and said, "I watched your performance 3 times in a row. You have something rare, Emily. Something real." Emily blushed. "Thank you. I never thought someone like you would ever notice me." Daniel shook his head. "You don't need to be noticed to be great. Greatness is already inside you. You just need to keep showing it." They talked for over an hour. He offered her mentorship and invited her to perform at a small concert he was organizing. Emily was nervous but agreed. It felt like a new door had opened, one she never thought she'd get close to. The night of the concert arrived, and Emily stood backstage, heart pounding. The hall wasn't huge, but it was filled with people who loved music. Her name was on the program, right next to Daniel Grant's. She walked onto the stage to a gentle applause, sat at the grand piano, and took a deep breath. She looked into the crowd and saw Donna in the front row, smiling proudly. She saw the little girl from the restaurant waving excitedly. She saw people who believed in her. Then she played. This time there was no bet, no challenge, no pressure. She played because she wanted to. She played with freedom, with joy, with everything she had. The room filled with the sound of her soul, and when the last note faded, the applause came again, louder, longer, and filled with love. After the concert, Daniel hugged her. "You were brilliant," Emily smiled. "I feel like I'm just getting started," he nodded. "That's the best part," and he was right. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she didn't have to choose between survival and dreams, one where she could be both a hardworking person and an artist, one where her voice, through music, could finally be heard. Emily returned home that night and sat at the small keyboard she had almost sold years ago. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play a new melody, one filled with hope, courage, and the belief that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead us back to ourselves. The girl who once played in her grandmother's living room was alive again, and the world was finally listening. Emily sat at her small kitchen table with a warm cup of tea in her hands. The soft hum of the city outside her window felt like music itself. Cars passing, people laughing, birds calling. Life felt different now, more colorful, more alive. She had no idea how much her world would change the night she played that piano in the restaurant. What began as a simple challenge had turned into something far more powerful. She had gone from a quiet, overlooked waitress to a young woman people now recognized, talked about, and even looked up to. Still, she remained humble, grounded in the same kindness that had always lived in her heart. The video of her playing had now reached millions. News channels had aired her story. Blogs, websites, and newspapers had written about her talent. Her social media accounts had exploded with followers, all praising her, asking her for more, and encouraging her to never stop. Some even sent her gifts, letters, and drawings. A young boy from Italy sent her a painting of her sitting at a piano, with golden lights all around her. Another girl from Brazil wrote that Emily's performance gave her courage to audition for her school music competition. Emily kept each message close to her heart. But behind all the praise and attention, she stayed focused on what mattered most: her music and the people who had always believed in her. She still went to the restaurant sometimes, though she didn't wear the waitress uniform anymore. Donna had changed her schedule. Now Emily came during dinner hours just to play the piano. A little sign next to the piano read, "Live Music, by Emily, the soul of our place." Every time she sat at that piano, the room filled with a different kind of silence. A beautiful silence, the kind that meant people were listening, feeling. Some of her songs were soft and calm, like a rainy afternoon. Others were more cheerful, like laughter shared between old friends. She played everything from her heart, never just to impress, but always to connect. And people felt that. One evening, while playing at the restaurant, Emily noticed someone standing near the door. It was Victor, the rich man who had made the bet that started it all. She hadn't seen him since that night. He wasn't smiling the way he used to, with that smug look on his face. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost shy. After she finished her set, Victor approached her. She stood up, unsure what to expect. "I came to say thank you," he said softly. Emily blinked. "Thank you?" "Yes," he nodded. "I was arrogant. That night I was trying to be funny at your expense. But when you played, something inside me changed. I didn't say anything before because I didn't know how. But I wanted you to know I'm sorry. And grateful." Emily looked at him for a long moment, then smiled gently. "It's okay. That night gave me something too. Something I'd forgotten I had." Victor nodded, almost relieved. "Well, I'm glad it did." He left soon after, but his words stayed with Emily. It was strange how life worked sometimes. A moment meant to embarrass her had led her to rediscover her passion. and it had even changed the heart of the man who caused it. As weeks passed, Emily received an invitation from a music foundation that helped young artists. They had seen her video and wanted her to perform at a charity concert for underprivileged children who dreamed of learning music but didn't have the means. Emily immediately said yes. She knew how that felt. She remembered all the times she had wanted lessons or instruments but couldn't afford them. The night of the charity concert arrived, and Emily stepped onto a large stage in a beautiful old theater filled with hundreds of people. Children sat in the front rows, eyes wide with wonder. Emily walked to the grand piano in the center of the stage, her heart pounding. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from excitement. She was ready. She began to play a melody she had written specially for this night. It started like a whisper, soft and warm, like a dream. Then it grew louder, fuller, like the rising sun. The children listened with open hearts, their faces glowing. Some closed their eyes, others leaned forward, drawn by the magic in the sound. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. But it wasn't just the clapping that made Emily's heart full. It was the way those children looked at her, like they believed anything was possible. After the concert, many of them came to hug her, ask her questions, and tell her their dreams. One little girl, barely 8 years old, said, "I want to be like you. I want to tell stories with music." Emily knelt down and said, "Then you must never stop believing in yourself. Music is in you. Just keep playing." That night something inside her changed again. She knew now that her gift was not just meant for herself. It was meant to be shared, to lift others, to inspire those who needed hope. She began volunteering at local community centers, teaching kids the basics of piano, sharing her story, and encouraging them to dream, no matter how impossible it seemed. A few months later, an international music school offered her a scholarship. They had watched her grow and believed she had the potential to become a professional pianist, not just a local star. It was a tough decision. She loved her restaurant family, her little apartment, her simple life. But deep down, she knew she had to take the next step. Before leaving for the school, Emily hosted one last performance at the restaurant. It was packed with customers, old and new friends, and even her former school music teacher, who had once encouraged her when she was a teenager. Donna gave a little speech before Emily played. "She came to us as a quiet, hard-working waitress," Donna said, holding back tears. "But she showed us that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. Tonight, we celebrate not just her talent, but her courage." When Emily sat at the piano that night, her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the flood of emotions. She played a collection of songs, some old, some new, all full of meaning. When she played the last note, the entire room stood up in applause. Some people cried, others shouted her name, and in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. She had shared her heart, and it had made a difference. The next morning, she packed her bags, hugged Donna tightly, and took a final look at the piano that had changed her life. Then she left for the music school. At the school, Emily worked harder than ever before. She studied music theory, composition, performance, and history. She met other young musicians from all over the world, some classically trained since childhood, others like her, full of natural talent and deep feeling. At first, she felt intimidated, but soon she found her place. Her professors admired her emotional connection to music. Her classmates respected her journey. Slowly, she began to shine. Years passed. Emily graduated with honors and began performing at concerts across the country. Her name started to appear on posters and concert halls. But no matter how big the stage, she never forgot where she came from. She always made time for charity events, community centers, and visits to the restaurant where it all began. She used her earnings to start a foundation in her grandmother's name, the Lily Rose Foundation, which provided free music lessons, and instruments to children from low-income families. Every child who entered the foundation's door was reminded that their dreams mattered. One day, during a concert in a grand hall, she looked out into the crowd and saw faces of children who had once been her students. They waved at her with bright eyes and happy hearts. Some of them had even started writing their own music. Emily smiled, her heart full. That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets, she thought of her grandmother, of the dusty piano, of the restaurant, of Donna, Miguel, Victor, and everyone who had been part of her journey. Life hadn't been easy, but every challenge, every tear, every moment of doubt had brought her here. She unlocked the door to her apartment, now filled with music books, letters from fans, and pictures of students. She sat at her own grand piano, one she had bought with her first concert earnings, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She played a new song, one that hadn't been written down yet. A song about rising after falling, about being seen after hiding, about becoming more than what the world expects. And as the music filled the room, she smiled, because Emily was no longer just a waitress with a secret gift. She was a musician. She was a storyteller. She was a dreamer who had turned her truth into a song that the world would never forget.